Great. Well, welcome everyone to today's session, which is all about navigating imposter syndrome. Um, some of you have already shared in the chat where you are, what you're feeling right now. Like I said, I'm based in New York, feeling a little bold. And again, today is really meant to be interactive. I want to hear from you. Ideally, I'd also love to see you. I'm so glad that you're joining live. It's always more fun for me to engage with people live. I hope it's also more fun for you. But as always, I'm recording, so you'll be able to access it afterwards if you so choose. I'm also going to be paying a lot of attention to the chat box. So if you have any questions or thoughts or reflections that you want to share, please feel free to drop it in there, hopefully to everybody, but you can also feel comfortable just sharing things directly to me and I'll share them anonymously. Okay, so let's dive in. I'm excited to share more about imposter syndrome with you all. It's definitely something that I struggle with on an ongoing basis. I've struggled with it my entire career, so it's very near and dear to my heart. But I'd love a show of hands or drop in the chat or react. How many of you have ever stopped yourselves from asking a question or participating in a meeting because you were afraid of looking dumb, asking a stupid question, any of that? Yes, I'm seeing a lot of reactions. Yes, me too. Hard yes for me. It's one of the most common things that come up for my clients, this fear of looking dumb or incompetent, asking a stupid question, especially for people who are just starting out in their roles. This comes up all the time. Super, super common. You are not the only one. And luckily, there are ways to overcome these voices in our heads that tell us that we're not good enough or smart enough or organized enough or strong enough or perfect enough, because that's what we all generally strive for, is perfection, which is a whole nother topic. We're not going to get too much into that today. But if you don't already know me, I'm going to just introduce myself. My name is Ariel Sedan. If you're here, hopefully you already know that. I'm an executive coach and the founder of Revel&Awe, and I focus on helping ambitious professionals build sustainable career paths and really fulfill their potential in their professional lives, and also sometimes by extension in their personal lives as well. My background is in management consulting. I've worked with people at every stage of the corporate pyramid, from the C-suite at the top, all the way down to boots on the ground on really wide range of projects. Frankly, my corporate experience is the least interesting thing about me, predominantly because I felt so much imposter syndrome in that field. But what it gave me was a foundation to bring into my area of passion, which is this intersection of psychology and business. And I've been able to leverage that past experience in the corporate world to join forces with my strengths, my passions, and help now hundreds of individuals on empowering them and helping them search for personal and professional satisfaction and growth and learning. And along the way, like I said, I struggled with a lot of imposter syndrome and self-doubt and stress and fear. It's still something that I grapple with. And for that reason, it's one of the things that I love working with clients on, because it's so common and so much more common and universal than most of us ever truly know. And hopefully we'll be able to break through some of those preconceptions today. So our goals for today are to learn a little bit more about the basics of imposter syndrome. How do we recognize it? And then I'm going to walk you through some exercises. Hopefully you'll join in and engage and share what comes up for you, to learn how to celebrate our wins, notice that critical inner voice that's coming up, and identify ways to stop comparing ourselves to others, and to start talking about feedback and reducing some of the fear that often comes with imposter syndrome around feedback. These exercises are going to be things that you can do on a repeated basis on your own afterwards. So I'm looking forward to hearing your thoughts on them. So let's start by talking a little bit about confidence. This is a word that's often put in contrast or in the same bucket as imposter syndrome. Please drop into the chat. What are the associations, the definitions, the things that come to mind when I say the word confidence? And I'll start reading these out loud also as you drop them in. Okay, great. Self-worth. I love that. That's a really good one. Trust in yourself, ability to navigate situations. That's a really, really helpful one, Jake. Thank you for sharing that. Certainty. Yes, these are all great. So according to Psychology Today, which I think they have great resources, confidence is this belief in oneself, trust, the conviction that one has to meet life's challenges and to succeed, and the willingness to act accordingly. And being confident requires a realistic sense of one's capabilities and feeling secure in that knowledge. I'm gonna read that back one more time because I think it's an important thing to keep in mind. This realistic sense of one's capabilities and feeling secure in that knowledge, in the realistic sense. Okay, we'll come back to that. Oh, fun fact. You probably could guess, but men and women have different track records when it comes to confidence. So there's an oft-cited report from Hewlett-Packard that is just so interesting. So it showed that women apply for jobs only if they meet all of the criteria, and men apply for jobs when they meet only 60% of the criteria on average, right? Everybody's different. And the same thing goes for promotions. Women will apply or put themselves up for promotion when they meet 100% of the criteria, and men will apply for promotion if they meet only 50% of the criteria. So there's a confidence gap in there where men say, I trust myself, I think I can do it, I know I can do it, I know I have the skills and capabilities, and women hold themselves back. So no wonder there's a visibility gap as you go further and further up the ladder. But the thing that I want to point out is that this is not about competence. It's not about the actual ability to do the job. It's actually about one's belief in your ability. So studies show over and over again that men and women have equal performance. Sometimes women actually outperform the men and are perceived as more competent by their managers. But it's this confidence gap that creates this rift. So how does this differ from imposter syndrome? Because low confidence is something that oftentimes goes hand in hand with imposter syndrome. The key difference that the way that I think about it is that low confidence is usually temporary, and it tends to be alleviated as we get proof that we can do something. So as we learn a new skill, we become more confident in it. We get proof that we can do it, and so we trust it. On the other hand, imposter syndrome tends to be more chronic. And the way that Harvard Business Review defines imposter syndrome is a collection of feelings of inadequacy that persist despite evident success. Despite evident success. So that contrasts to that confidence definition, the realistic sense of one's capabilities. So we have the evidence that we can do it, but we don't believe it when we have imposter syndrome. So imposters can suffer from this chronic sense of self-doubt and this intellectual fraudulence that really outweighs any proof, any external proof of their competence. And I think it's important to note that because even if we have moments of low confidence or we doubt ourselves, that doesn't always mean that we have imposter syndrome. And in either case, there are things that can be pushed back against, yes. And the other thing I want to point out is that imposter syndrome is so common. I mean, studies show that up to at least I don't want to say up to, at least 70% of people struggle with imposter syndrome at least at one point in their lives. And because imposter syndrome can be more chronic, it can ebb and flow. It can come up more strongly in certain situations than others. It can be triggered or activated in certain situations. But everyone, almost everyone, feels imposter syndrome at some point in their lives. So oftentimes the thing that comes up with imposter syndrome, and we're going to talk about this, is comparing ourselves to other people. Those people probably have imposter syndrome too, and for different reasons. So that person who seems like they just have this shiny aura about them, like they walk on water, they are probably also dealing with imposter syndrome. If that makes you feel any better or not, just something to keep in mind. And the implications of experiencing chronic imposter syndrome are actually pretty big. So imposter syndrome can, of course, lead to self-doubt. It can lead to anxiety and depression, burnout, missed opportunities, right? Not applying for those jobs or that promotion, not asking for that raise because you don't feel like you meet all of the criteria. And a lot of wasted energy. In fact, people with imposter syndrome tend to go above and beyond at all times to try and prove themselves and continuously add value and try to create more evidence for themselves and for others that they are worthy. But it's oftentimes unnecessary. Any questions so far about imposter syndrome or confidence? Please feel free to drop them into the chat. Like I said, I'm going to be responding to questions as we go through. And we'll also have time at the end for more dedicated Q&A. Just putting it out there. So that's the intro to imposter syndrome. Today, I want to take you through a couple of these on-the-spot exercises to counter some of the common facets of imposter syndrome that come up and hopefully start helping you build confidence. Now, these are things that you can also do on your own, on a regular basis, or as you feel that inner critic is sort of popping its head up again, and making you question yourself. So if you don't already have a pen and paper in front of you, now would be a great time to grab those. And I'll give everybody a second to do that. And we're going to start with celebrating wins. This is one of my favorite exercises. I'm not going to preface it, actually. I'm just going to dig into it. So if everybody has pen and paper, I'm going to assume that the answer to that is yes at this point. It's important to note before we dive into this exercise that our brains are wired to look for stress and to look for triggers of stress. It is an evolutionary thing that we have. It helped us, look for danger in the forest and watch out for the snake or the tiger. But most of us don't live in the forest, and we're not really afraid of snakes and tigers right now. But our brain doesn't know the difference between a snake and, someone who's intimidating. They both can create the same type of stress response. And so it's no surprise then that our brains actually amplify the negatives, these stress triggers, because it thinks it's protecting us. And so it causes us to really think more strongly about our weaknesses, to ruminate about awkward interactions or mistakes that we made. We think that they're more substantial and worrisome and impactful than our strengths, our positive impact, and our value. Kind of just how our brain works. But knowing this, it's actually up to us. We have the choice to turn up the volume on the positives and to amplify them in our own minds so that we can first and foremost identify them and then build pride in them and ultimately demonstrate that pride outwardly through confidence and creating visibility so that others can see and value them too. And one of the ways to do this is through what I call wins journaling. And we're going to try it right now. So for the next 90 seconds, I'm going to put a timer. I want you to jot down every win you can think of from this week. Think about what positive feedback did you get? What did you feel accomplished or proud of? How did you challenge yourself? How did you embody your values or make progress on a goal? All of these things are totally valid. And I'm going to share my screen so that I can show you the timer. I'm also experimenting with this a little bit, so bear with me. Portion of my screen. Okay. So I'm giving you 90 seconds. Here's the prompt, the exercise. Go for it. Jot down everything you can think of, all the good. Amplify the positive. Few more seconds, get in a last bullet or two. Great. How did that feel? If you feel so inclined to share some of the things that came up for you, please feel free to drop them into the chat. Now, one of the things that I love about this exercise is how quickly it sometimes works, especially once you get the hang of it. Sometimes right away, actually. And sometimes it takes a few weeks to get into the swing of things and learn to keep an eye out for those positive things to look out for. And I give this to almost all of my clients, definitely the ones who suffer with confidence and imposter syndrome challenges. And I recommend that they keep a wins journal, taking anywhere from just those 90 seconds to up to 5 minutes at the end of their day to reflect on and celebrate their wins. And over time, you'll likely start to identify some patterns. And those patterns can be based on what you see in yourself. It could be comments or feedback from others. And the thing that I want to point out is that these common patterns can oftentimes uncover your superpowers. Now, superpowers are like your natural strengths, the things that you get fired up about. I have a client that I've been working with for a while, and she came to me with imposter syndrome. She was brand new to her team. She was working with really experienced people. And we started doing these exercises, wins journaling every day. And after the first 3 weeks or so, it was really early on, she started noticing that she was advocating for other people. Even though she was really young on the team, she was, helping other people. She was jumping in. She was noticing what felt fair and unfair to others and talking to her manager about it. And through this process, over the course of a few other extra months after that, we discovered that one of her superpowers was advocating for others. And eventually we were able to turn that superpower around and actually help her advocate for herself through that superpower. So noticing those patterns over time actually helps you uncover some deeper natural strengths in there. I'm just reading through the chat, considering how I was thinking this week got off to a slow start. Yes, acknowledging the wins and recovering from the Monday morning red eye. Love that. Yes, even when we start the week off a little bit rocky and we feel not so great about it, we can take some time, reflect on what has been going well. Like I said, turn up the volume on the positives. We often don't do that enough. Okay, so take this forward with you, put it into practice. Feel free to try it out even every day this week. But especially if you start to feel a little down on yourself, like those critical voices are getting a little loud. Now, one of the things I mentioned earlier was how people with imposter syndrome compare themselves to others. How many people do this? Raise a hand, react, nod, yes. Seeing applause. I'll take that as a heavy yes. Yes, it is so challenging not to. We do it from a young age when we compare our toys to other people's toys, when we want what other people want. It's totally natural. But it doesn't always help us. Sometimes it can motivate, but oftentimes it hurts us. Now, I'll tell you another client story. I had a client who was a pretty young engineer, and she was on a team with only one other person at her level, and then a whole crew of folks with at least 5 years of experience. And she would come to our sessions feeling so overwhelmed, and she felt like she just couldn't compete with all of their knowledge and their confidence, and they always knew the right answers, and on and on and on. And we had to have like a really serious sit down conversations about comparing apples to oranges. Like we hear this all the time, don't compare apples to oranges, but we still do it even without noticing. And they're both fruit, of course, just like she and all of her teammates were all engineers, but they were in completely different places in their career. And I reminded her that in 5 years, there will be someone new to her team, and she will be someone that they compare themselves to. And we realized that she didn't want that to be the case. She wouldn't want someone who's brand new to put themselves in the situation that she was in right now, creating those false comparisons. Now, easier said than done, I know. So let's put it into practice. I want you to think about someone who activates that self-consciousness that really makes you feel like you're not good enough. The one who's super smart, super strong, always has the right answers at the right time, who seems like they get all the gold stars. The one who next to them, you feel like super uncomfortable asking questions or making comments or contributing. Is it a colleague, a manager, a friend, a family member? It could be anybody. Now I want you to picture yourself next to them and put yourself in a scenario with them. Recreate the thoughts, the feelings that come up when you're around them. Now take that piece of paper and draw a line down the middle of it, or you can fold it in half, whatever feels right for you. And I'm going to set another timer for the next 3 minutes. On one side of that line, I want you to write down everything about this person, or maybe it's a group of people, that makes you feel not great, that makes you feel small, inexperienced, dumb, just overall not good enough. Okay, I'm going to set the timer, 3 minutes. I'm going to share my screen and see what you come up with. Ready, set, go. Oh no, this is not the right one. This is the one. Sorry about that. And if you feel like you finished early, you can just hit a reaction so I can see who's done. But feel free to take the full 3 minutes. Just another 20 seconds. And if you're already done, if you don't mind dropping into the chat, what did it feel like to recreate that scenario, that relationship? What came up? Was it triggering? Was it interesting? Awkward? Did nothing come up? When I do this exercise, sometimes with clients, they feel really anxious, sort of recreating those scenarios for themselves. So if that's something that you felt, that's totally reasonable. Also, if you felt like it was a little bit awkward, also totally normal. There's no right answer. It's just an exercise, seeing what comes up. Now, great, felt familiar, cool. Now I'm gonna set another timer. And for the next 3 minutes, I want you to go down the list that you've written of all of the things that felt triggering and write a counterpoint next to it. Why that trigger is not worth comparing to or not a valid trigger. Maybe it's not even worth becoming stressed about. So this is an opportunity to evaluate the comparisons that we make more objectively. And if it helps, think about how would you address these points if it was your best friend feeling this way? Like if they came to you and they were talking about all of these comparisons that they were making to someone at work, how would you help them think through whether or not these were valid comparisons for themselves? So I'm going to start the timer again and go for it. Go down the list. See what comes up. Just a few more seconds. And then we'll regroup. Okay. So I'm curious to hear what came up for you. And you can feel free to share that. You can just think about it. Maybe you found a counterpoint to each bullet, each sort of trigger, and maybe you didn't. That's okay too. Not everything will immediately have something to counter it. But the goal here is to really give yourself an opportunity to step out of the feelings, which sometimes feel so big or consuming and overwhelming, and think about things more objectively so that we can recognize, what's realistic, and also realize that like you can be imperfect and in progress, and that doesn't necessarily mean that you are lesser than anybody else, and you don't need to feel worse about yourself because you're not perfect. Perfect doesn't exist. So you're allowed to have flaws, you're allowed to make mistakes, you're allowed to not have experiences that other people have, and that doesn't mean that that comparison is necessary. Everyone's on their own path, I guess is the way to put it. Now, based on this exercise, you probably already know that comparing yourself to people in totally different places than you is a huge contributor to imposter syndrome. And it really places you in competition with people who are playing a different game. They're on a different path. And so it's really important to think about how we can focus on ourselves and compare ourselves today to where we were yesterday, or 6 months ago, or 6 years ago, or even longer, or 16 years ago. Multiples of 6. That's not a multiple of 6, but it's fine. Math is not my strong suit. Really thinking about like reducing this noise of the false comparisons, because once you do that, you can actually start to acknowledge your own progress and the obstacles that you've overcome, because what you've gone through, other people haven't gone through, and they're also on their own paths. So this actually lets you set more reasonable goals as you think about where you want to go next, when you consider where you've been and what you've overcome this far. And setting reasonable goals and then attaining reasonable goals eases the strain of aiming too high too quickly. So it's great to learn from others' experiences, to get mentorship or advice. And at the same time, each person is on their own path, and each path is going to look different. And the other thing that I'm going to add here, this last point, is that whether you're currently working, or maybe even if you're looking for your next opportunity, you have your own superpowers. We talked about that after the last exercise, and it could be your ability to empathize or communicate or resolve conflict or code really, really speedily. I work with a lot of engineers. It could be your attention to detail or your ability to come up with so crazy it just might work kind of plans. Once you know your superpowers, you can own it, and it becomes easier to value yourself based on those superpowers, and for each person that you work with to recognize the individual gifts that you bring to the table. And you don't have to compare yourself to others. It can just be about the value that you as an individual bring. Questions about that, reflections on the exercise? I'd love to hear from you guys what you're experiencing on the other side of the computer.
I wanted to say that your comment about being allowed to not have experiences that other people have is like life changing for me. It's I think that's one of the things that I tend to do the most is compare experiences. And I think I've just never heard it sort of said so plainly. So thank you.
Thank you for sharing that. Yeah, I mean, what you're describing is so common. I mean, I've been there too, and still am oftentimes. And I think there's something about reminding ourselves that we all have different places that we've been from experience places and geographical places, and life just in general, where we come from is always so different. And that's part of what's interesting about getting to know other people. And it's also part of why we can't, like, we're not comparing apples and apples. I don't know how else to put it, but I really appreciate that you shared that. Something that I think helps to remind ourselves to quiet those comparative voices. Jake also shared in the chat, it's really helpful to look at those counterpoints to interrupt the emotions and the stories. Yeah, thank you for sharing that. That's the goal, right? Is to be able to think more objectively about where those emotions are coming from and consider whether or not they're accurate. Which is a wonderful segue into our next exercise. Now, one of the things that comes up so much in sessions with clients, especially people who struggle with imposter syndrome or confidence challenges, is fear, like immense fear and paralysis and anxiety around feedback. It's scary to ask for feedback. Anytime someone asks for a meeting, it feels really stressful, and like the knots just start forming, and a lot of jumping to conclusions about what's going to be said, what we're afraid is going to come up in those meetings. And one of the things, the most life-changing thing that I learned is reducing the fear of feedback. It is a gift to receive feedback. And I'll put it this way, especially when it's done right, it can be a gift. Sometimes it can also be painful, but learning how to separate it from ourselves is part of the process. But as a most basic example, like if you had broccoli in your teeth, right? Would you rather that nobody tell you and then you go to an important pitch or a date with broccoli in your teeth? Or would you rather face the short-term awkwardness and have somebody tell you that actually saves you from that longer-term awkwardness of being in that meeting or on that date with broccoli in your teeth? I would guess that most people would want to know upfront. They'd want somebody to point it out and say, hey, just so you know, like, you got something in your teeth, like right there. I would want to know if I had something in my teeth. I kind of assume that you would too. But when it comes to work and getting feedback about our work, it feels so much heavier than just having something in our teeth or something easy to fix. So let's talk about what you're afraid of hearing. I'm going to set another timer. I'm experimenting a lot with timers now, so thanks for bearing with me. And I want you to think about the feedback that you're afraid of. I want you to brain dump on that sheet of paper all the feedback that you're scared is going to come up. Performance review season is among us. Maybe you're going through a performance review. Maybe you have a one-to-one coming up with your manager. Maybe you're avoiding asking for feedback. All of that's totally okay. But I want you to dump all of the things that you're afraid of, all of the worst case scenarios that run through your head when you hear the word feedback, and write it down. I'm going to set a timer. I'm going to share my screen, and then I'm going to let you guys get it all down on the page. Go for it. One more minute. Get it all out. Okay. So, how did that feel? Putting it all down on the page. I'll let you guys think about that. Feel free to drop it into the chat too. Okay, so we got all of the worst case scenario planning onto the page. Maybe it's sentence fragments, maybe it's quotes, whatever it is, feelings that you're afraid that will come up, all cool. I'm gonna give you one more minute and I'm gonna ask you to go through the list and rank the likelihood of actually getting the feedback. Maybe rank isn't the right word. Maybe it's more like scale the likelihood that you're actually going to get the feedback on a scale of 1 to 10. 1 is I know it's not going to happen. I'm just telling myself a story. And 10 is I know it's going to happen and I have many examples. I'm totally positive. Okay. 1 to 10. Go through the list. Don't think about it. Just scale it. Twenty more seconds. Okay. If you're still scaling the last couple, that's okay. So I want to hear what came up for you guys. Now, maybe drop into the chat. I'm going to give you some food for thought here. For the items that were scaled 1 to 5, meaning that they're very unlikely to come up, I want you to think about, and feel free to drop into the chat, what are the things that you can do to change your internal narrative around your work? Because if it's unlikely to come up, it's a story that you're telling yourself. So if reality does not match your fears, your mind is playing tricks on you, which means that there's an opportunity to tell yourself a kinder, more true version of the story. So what are those things that you can do to change that narrative in your head? Feel free to drop it into the chat. Now, on the other side of the 5, if you scaled some things 5 to 10, which means that there is a likelihood, if not a strong likelihood, that those things are going to come up. How can you reframe the feedback so that it's motivating you to create beneficial change? Oftentimes when we hear negative or constructive feedback, we shut down, we get defensive, we put our walls up, we even, self-flagellating and really ruminating in how horrible we are at our jobs. And that negative talk can be so cruel. But feedback, again, if it's done well, can provide insight into the ways that we can improve and take control and make an even greater impact So how can we use this feedback and take it forward as a blueprint for our success? So instead of feeling so negative about constructive or critical feedback, how can we use it as fodder for momentum, for progress? That's the food for thought. On the 1 to 5, how do you change the story? And on the 5 to 10, how do you reframe the feedback so it hurts less and motivates more? I'm going to read this out loud. All of mine were 1 to 5. What comes to mind first is I can actually ask for feedback more often. It's something I want to do and speak about doing, but continue to prioritize less. Yes. And there's an awkwardness in asking for feedback. The asking is often worse than the actual feedback. I hear that a lot. And people are often really hesitant to ask for feedback directly. So that's really common. I think if we recognize that some of the things that we're afraid of hearing are unlikely, it lowers the bar, the threshold to actually asking for feedback, because it really can create that blueprint to move forward and to make progress, increase our impact. Okay, any questions about this exercise? Anything that came up for you? Okay. Well, we have a few more minutes, and in this this final stretch, I'll say, I want to leave you with some thoughts. We talked a little bit about the narratives that we tell ourselves, the stories that we tell ourselves. And there's a researcher who does a lot of research around imposter syndrome. Her name is Valerie Young, and she wrote that the only way to stop feeling like an imposter is to stop thinking like an imposter. And from my experience, the only real way to stop thinking like an imposter is to shift the stories that we tell ourselves, and sometimes also the stories that we tell others, and learn to give ourselves the credit that we deserve to go after what we want, even if we don't feel 150% ready. Because so much of the path that we're on is about progress and moving forward towards our goals. We often strive for perfection, which is unrealistic. And like I said in the beginning, that's a totally different beast. But even practicing these management techniques, these opportunities to reframe the critical voices, the fear of feedback, the comparative tendencies that we have, these are things that are in progress, in process all the time. We're always in flux with them, with the stories that we tell ourselves, with how confident we feel. And we have an opportunity to take some control over the narrative. So what I'll leave you with is that, today you might be afraid of failure, or feedback, or looking dumb, whatever failure means for you. But future you has a chance to prove to today you that you can do it. And if we've learned anything about imposter syndrome today, it's actually that you're capable of going above and beyond to deliver. There is consistent evidence that you are competent. So give yourself the opportunity to go for it. Apply for the job, make the case to your boss why you deserve a raise or a promotion, and then do it all over again. Continuously tell yourself the stories that are true and accurate and empowering, and celebrate the leaps of faith that you take every day. Because ultimately that's the way that we're able to shift the narrative. And it won't be perfect. Some days will be better than others, but over time it really will yield progress. And that's what we're going for overall. Okay, that's pretty much it from my end. I really want to open the floor to any questions that come up. And I'm also going to say that I am going to be sending out an email in the next 24 hours asking for feedback. But if you already have time to think about that, I'm going to drop the link in the chat. So if you have an opportunity to just take 2 or 3 minutes to fill out the feedback form, it really helps me, and hopefully eventually also helps you. And if you're interested in learning more about imposter syndrome or working with a coach, working with me on imposter syndrome, I welcome you to email me or fill out the feedback form. We can talk about doing a call and see how you can get that support. And in the meantime, any questions that came up for you, any reflections, any other reflections, because we've already had some sharing already, I'm happy to take those now.